Hey, everybody. Welcome to our Sessionable Saturdays. I'm your host, Greg Avola, founder of Untapped. We're super excited you're here on this beautiful Saturday, at least where I'm located in Connecticut. I'm not sure where it is for you, but it's sunny. It's nice out there. We're going to drink some great beer and talk to an amazing guest, a personal idol of myself, Garrett Oliver. I want to bring him up on the screen here. Garrett from Brooklyn Brewery, thanks for joining us.
How you doing?
Awesome. Really excited to have you on. Before we get into all the great details about where you're up to, what Brooklyn Brewery is up to, and obviously the beer, that's the most important part, I want to thank our sponsor for this show today, Minibar. Minibar is a delivery service that is offering a $10 promo off your first order using the promo code UNTAPPED. Obviously, in this horrible situation we're in, delivery is a great option to support your local breweries, bars, and locations, and Minibar can deliver those products directly to you. So make sure you use the promo code UNTAPPED and get $10 off your first order. And we thank Minibar for their support of our show. So Garrett, if people are living under a rock and they don't know who you are, can you give us a synopsis of what you do at Brooklyn Brewery, your little story, and all the great stuff there?
Well, I'm the Brewmaster of Brooklyn Brewery. And the author of the Brewmaster's Table and the editor-in-chief of the Oxford Companion to Beer. Mm-hmm. I am 400 years old, and I have been brewing since before almost anybody knew what a brew pub was or anything else. So like I'm like Dracula. I've always been here, and I'll always be here. And I've had an opportunity to watch, the amazing arc of not only American craft beer, but craft beer around the world, and be a very active participant. And while we are all taking an unwanted break from various things right now, craft brewers are still at it. So get on those delivery orders and keep both yourselves and your local breweries afloat.
Absolutely. One of the cool stories I have with Brooklyn Brewery, obviously, is I lived in New York and Roosevelt Island for about 6 or 7 years, live in Connecticut now. And for some reason, when Untapped first started, because it was born out of New York, the Brooklyn Brewery actually invited me to one of their opening new beers they were announcing at your brewery in Brooklyn. I believe it was the Concoction back in the old days there.
Wow.
That was, we're really going back in a long time. It was the first time we ever got a chance to show anything to do with Untapped on the screen there. We actually used their projector, we put it up on the screen. It was pretty crazy. So we definitely go way back in our relationship, and we're happy to have you here. But let's talk about the beers we're drinking today. I actually went to a few stores, could not find any Brooklyn Brewery, which is amazing. I could not do that. But I do have Equilibrium, which is a New York brewery up in Middletown, Connecticut, up there. That I'm going to be trying. It is Photon, which is a pale ale here. What are you drinking on your side, Garrett?
Well, first of all, Greg, that's because it's sold out. Everybody already has the Brooklyn in the house.
I was too late.
You're too late. You gotta get on that.
I know.
I got a couple of things going depending on the mood. I got some Brooklyn Rosé de Ville, which is our seasonal raspberry sour, which is really fun. So I could drink that nice and tart. And then I got a little private stash of some of Vinny and Natalie Salerzo from Russian River. We had some care packages back and forth. So they got me some Road to Hill 56, which is an awfully good pale ale based on Simcoe.
Awesome. Well, let's crack open a beer right now and do a virtual cheers. If you're out there right now watching us, crack open your beer, check in on Untapped. Make sure you tag the Untapped at Home venue and share it with your friends. Make sure you also share on Instagram and Twitter, and we'll basically be able to share that on our networks as well. So really appreciate all the support that you're giving your local breweries out there and be able to kind of cheers them. So we'll pour a little beer here. I do have a Brooklyn Brewery glass. I'm half and half here, so I don't get the beer, but I've got the glass going on. So
well, you're doing well.
I'm trying to do a little bit, So
my glass is this is an antique glass. I don't know, sometime around 1910. It is Danish. Mm-hmm. I have a pretty large collection of antique glassware. So when I get an opportunity, I pull it out. A lot of it is like, cocktail glassware or whatever else, but this is actually a beer glass and it weighs about 1.5 pounds. So They knew how to make solid glasses back then. So cheers.
Well, cheers, everybody. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. Raise your glass and try your beer. Mm. Tasty beverage.
That's a nice.
Yeah. So ultimately, let's get into the question. If you have questions for Garrett, we got a team watching all the comments here. Make sure you ask them there, and we'll flag them, and we'll probably answer them if we get some time near the end. But a few quick questions for you to start, Garrett. Just give us a kind of a backstory. Obviously, you're a well-established author. You've written a lot of books. You've done the brewing and stuff. Where did all that start? Because I know you came from, a film student at Boston University. How did that transfer into this kind of career that you have right now?
Well, in 1983, I moved from New York City. After I graduated with a degree in film, as you said, I worked for a summer for HBO in original programming. So to give you some idea of how long ago that was, I worked Eddie Murphy's first tour, Delirious.
Wow.
I worked David Bowie's Serious Moonlight tour.
Oh, wow.
At Madison Square Garden, etc. So, go look up those songs. That's, that's how long back we're talking about here. And I moved to England in the September of 1983, and I bought a motorcycle, and I started stage managing rock bands, which is something that I had already been doing at school. But the thing is, my friends were taking me out to the pub. And at the pub, there was this stuff called beer. Now, I had thought that during my college career, I had been drinking beer, but it turned out that I was wrong. And so, I was drinking the British cask-conditioned beer. And at first, I wasn't sure that I liked it. It was, by American standards, warm and flat.
Right.
Over time, I came to realize that it was cool, cellar temperature, and lightly and naturally carbonated, but I certainly didn't look at it that way at first. But even after the first pint, I was like, this is really interesting, which is something I had never said about any beer before. Because the dirty little secret back then is we all drank beer, but we didn't like it. I mean, we didn't really like it. It was there, it was a thing. Yeah, it was a thing that worked. And frankly, I'll tell you the honest truth. We bought Budweiser when we had money. Because it was absolutely neutral. To us, Budweiser tasted like absolutely nothing, and we thought that was awesome. Because the other stuff that we could normally afford tasted much, much, much worse than nothing. It was terrible. So I had respect for the big guys, but I didn't want to drink those beers, and I started drinking British beer. And when I got back to the United States, after having traveled all over Europe and had Belgian beers and German beers and all this wonderful stuff, I got back and they said, Bud Light, Miller Lite, Coors Light, Heineken. And I was like, no. So I can't, I can't. So I started brewing at home, standard to this day. It's only now in these days that you're getting a different story of the origin, of a craft brewer. Because for a long time, there was really only kind of one origin story. Which was American brewer goes to Europe, falls in love with beer, comes back, has to have it, makes it at home. Exactly. Now we have different stories developing, which is cool. But anyway, that was my story. I eventually ended up helping start and run a group called the New York City Home Brewers Guild, which is still running. I was president for some years. I wrote newsletters. And eventually I went to work for a place called Manhattan Brewing Company, which was run by a guy named Mark Whitty, who had been the senior brewer for Samuel Smith's in England. And so that was my apprenticeship that started me on the way to becoming a professional brewer. Mark left a couple of years later. I took over as brewmaster there, was brewmaster there for almost 2 years, and then came to Brooklyn Brewery in 1994. So I've been at Brooklyn Brewery for 26 years.
Whew, that's a good stretch.
Yes. It's a big stretch. I told you 400 years.
Yeah, 400 years old. I get it. Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the things that when I lived in New York and I was getting into craft beer, one of the first brewers I ever went to was your brewery in Williamsburg over there. And one of the things that kind of struck me as unique about your brewery is the kind of more community feel to it, where you have these big red doors you walk into, you have these picnic tables that you sit down at. There's not a long line with small little tiny bar stools. It was more of a community driven kind of thing, which it was awesome. And if you haven't been to the Brooklyn Brewery, obviously now is not the right choice to go there. But definitely when all this kind of situated, it's definitely a great space to check out and kind of explore that space. Because I mean, it's just very unique. It's one of those things where you're walking around a corner and then bam, there it is. And it's kind of cool to see how you've been able to build that up over the last 20 some odd years.
Well, we take up most of the block, and back in the old days, I can tell you that area, that part of Williamsburg, which now is like, it's kind of expensive and it's, it's considered trendy, et cetera. But back then it was edgy and a bit dangerous. We were the first thing that actually brought people. I mean, cabs wouldn't take you there like in the late 90s, early 2000s. We didn't even get ATMs until the early 2000s in the neighborhood. You literally had to go into Manhattan if you wanted to get some money. That was how backward the area was. And over time, we started to really build a community of people coming in. I remember we used to have so many people in there, and I know it's a controversial thing, but it wasn't back then. With their kids, we were just glad to see people being comfortable around beer and hanging out. And I remember one day we got an email saying that we heard that Friday, and that was the only time we were open, was Friday evening. We heard that Friday is kids' night at Brooklyn Brewery. We were like, no, there is no kids' night at Brooklyn Brewery.
I think it's interesting too, because a lot of people have breweries have become more community driven. They're more areas to hang out. It used to be the old taboo was you never bring kids into an area. I know it's controversial and stuff like that, but nowadays it's really kind of changed to more community driven spots. And I think that's really cool to see across the board. And one of the greatest stories I had was, going to your brewery and trying my first couple of beers I had from them almost 10 years ago was the local 1 and the local 2 series that you guys had. And there's a question from Christopher O'Brien in the chat now, and it wants to ask a little bit more about the development of the 1 and 2 and if there's any plans for those in the future.
Well, those beers developed in the mid 2000s. And it was really, we had been, a little bit before that, we had been also a distributorship. So a lot of people don't know this, but we actually completely from the top down, we built the craft beer market in New York City, period. If it wasn't like Sam Adams or Guinness, basically, and it was a craft beer, you got it from us. Right. And when we sold off that part of the business, the distribution business, we had 200 plus beers. And of course, most of them weren't ours. And I was kind of missing beers like Saison DuPont, Chimay, Orval, et cetera, and the beautiful qualities that they had. And I said, I think we can learn how to do this. And so when I started actually looking around, checking out the European beers and American beers, I found out that there were almost no bottle conditioned beers, truly bottle conditioned beers in the United States. And by truly bottle conditioned, I mean they are bottled flat, with no carbonation whatsoever, and gain all their carbonation from a secondary fermentation in the bottle. Because one thing that I found was that was something that all of my favorite beers from Belgium, or at least almost all of my favorite beers from Belgium and Germany, had in common. And so it was something I wanted to learn how to do. And so I met up with a guy named Bert van Hecke, who at the time had just left Sim Bernardus. He was a very young guy at the time, still young compared to me, but he was in his mid-20s. And he was one of the few guys who actually knew how to do this, because most of the beers, even out of Belgium, that have yeast in the bottle are not actually bottle conditioned. So he said, no, we're doing it the real way. And he spent 3 days with us and really showed us a lot about how to do that in a professional brewery, because it turned out that it was not information that was available anywhere in any language. It wasn't in German, it wasn't in Flemish, it wasn't in English. No one had ever written it down. It was something that was passed down in families and in companies. And so it was unavailable information. Now, since then, that's actually a thing that I teach at Craft Brewers Conference and other conferences around the world, is how to do bottle conditioning. So in mid 2006, we started doing that beer, and over the years, those have been many of my favorite of our beers have been the beers that are re-fermented in the bottle. It gives you a texture that you simply can't get any other way.
Yeah, I mean, I remember trying it for the first time. It was just something I've never tasted before, and it's the same kind of experience we talked about going over to Europe and England and trying bottle conditioned beers or on cask. You know, the first sip, you're like, "Is there something wrong with this, or is this just the way that it is?" I think that was a unique perspective to bring that back to the United States. I think a lot of it is your interest in having both the European style and the American style kind of merging together, and that actually encourages people to try different things that are not used to. So that's really cool to see and hear the story around those. I know that I remember buying those bottles when they came out. I'm like, oh, this is amazing! This is fantastic. So very cool.
It's a funny thing because the 750 bottle, which was for many years kind of a standard bottle, the big champagne type bottle. Yep. For a long time, that was the standard bottle for beers like that. You saw smaller ones, obviously, but they weren't the main thing.
But you're really unique, though. It wasn't just a standard bottle. It was engraved.
We had our own bottle for sure.
Exactly, it's very cool.
But then, over the last few years, as cans became popular and smaller bottles, people kind of abandoned the 750. Mm-hmm. And I would talk to people, and they say, "Well, it's too big." And I was like, "What do you mean it's too big? It wasn't too big, a few years ago." It was like, "Well, you can't drink it by yourself." I was like, "Drink it by yourself? Like, why would you want to? Like, what are you talking about? Why would you want to drink it by yourself? What's wrong with you? Like, don't you have any friends?" It's like, well, now none of us have any friends.
Virtually, we have friends. Virtually,
yeah,
right?
we have virtual friends. So I think that those are beers that you're going to see over the time ending up in different packages because the world has changed and things keep moving.
Absolutely. Speaking of friends, it seems like you have one in Sean Clark, who just wrote a comment that says, "Was great honor to meet you, Garrett, last year at GBF. Hopefully one of these opportunities to visit the brewery. Cheers from Victoria, British Columbia, Canada." So Sean,
cheers.
Thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate it.
One day I flew from Vancouver to Victoria Island in the front of a seaplane, which is something that he can tell you that you never forget.
Very true. Well, obviously with your history and writing, being an author, what are the inspirations for new beers that come through your brain? Is there more of a cooking and finding taste? And obviously you've done a lot of videos now on Instagram. We saw of the omelet, which looked amazing, that you did recently of doing the omelet. I believe it was the Granny Smith apples, goat cheese, and Bel Air as a side. Yeah, how does this inspire you to kind of create new types of beverages and beers in your brewery?
Well, I'm usually looking for a flavor profile that our other roster of beers simply doesn't do. Mm-hmm. I like to have some space between the flavors of beers. So I don't want to produce a new beer that tastes pretty much like a version of another beer, right. Whether it's our beer in particular or whether it is somebody else's beer. I want the beers to have their own personalities and also what I refer to as talents. What I mean by talents is like, what can this beer do that the other beers can't do?
Right.
And I kind of feel like beer is almost like clothes. Like, if you're looking at a shirt and the shirt is really nice, but it's kind of expensive, one question I'd ask myself is, well, when am I going to wear this shirt as opposed to this other shirt that I like?
Right,
and
right.
The answer is that I'm always going to pick the other shirt first. I'm not going to buy this shirt.
Right.
And I feel it's the same thing about a beer. Like, when will I drink this as opposed to the other things that we make? Mm-hmm. And there has to be a reason. So that's one thing. Another thing is certainly also, food. What talent does it have? Does it go with something that we don't have a beer that really works well with that particular thing? For example, starting to make new types of barley wines, barrel-aged barley wines with a little more residual sugar was partly because I kept getting beat by wine professionals whenever we got to the round where they would put out the port or something to go with the Stilton. And I thought my pairing was better, but people really liked sweet things in Stilton. And I wasn't really into sweet beers. I'm like, I'll show them. I'll show up with some residual sugar too. And so, there's the concoction was obviously a cocktail inspiration based on the penicillin, which is a weird but beautiful cocktail that contains Scotch, ginger, honey, and lemon.
It was an amazing beer. I remember that night. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah. And so there are inspirations that come from all over the place. But, beer is essentially culinary in my mind. So in some certain way, it's usually culinary. But it can be also a person. It can be a technique. We've made a number of beers using wild yeast that come from other fermentations, particularly naturally fermented wines and ciders. And we'll take the yeast that comes down to the bottom of their fermentation, transfer it into a barrel with our beer, and then ride that out. And that's something I'd like to do a lot more of over the next years.
Great. Yeah. I mean, speaking of all the beers that you've gone through, we had a question from Patty Martin, which said, of all the beers that you brewed, Garrett, which one that stands out for any reason, for either for food preferences or whether you liked it, or which one stands out for you from one of the beers you've been able to brew? It's like a loaded question. I apologize.
Yeah, it is classically that which of your children do you love best? Kind of question. And of course, there's usually an answer to that question, but it changes, depending on what's going on at the time.
Right.
I do have to say though that I think that that Local One was such a game changer for us, because I look at who we were and what we knew how to do, pre-2006 and then after 2006. There's really a major dividing line, in the culture and the level of quality and technique and everything else of the brewery, between those times. The other one would really be Serpent, the collaboration that we did about 5 years ago with our good friends at the Thornbridge Brewery in Derbyshire in England, and Tom Oliver's cider and Perry. And so we took all of Tom Oliver's yeast, wild yeast, from 120 barrels of fermentation, transferred into a version of Local One that we brewed at Thornbridge. I sent the barrels over. We went over and over again. And every bottle of that corked, wire caged, bottled, everything by hand.
Wow.
And a year and a half in the barrel, as Tom Oliver's yeast took over the flavors of the beer. And certainly one of the coolest things that I've ever had an opportunity to do.
That's
and
awesome.
Great people all around.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to make a beer with the brewery, go through its regular fermentation process and get it out in cans. But the fact that you did all this stuff together, you shipped over the barrels, you waited a year and a half, you put it in by hand. It's got something special about that. So I can definitely see how that ranks high in your playbook there. So that's really, really cool.
And also, these are our friends, not like, I mean, I love all of our Untapped friends and our Facebook friends and whatever else, but these are people like that we go on holiday with.
Yes.
Not sort of a casual, it's not a photo op. And so, there was something particularly special, about being able to do that. And I'm looking forward to doing a lot more things like that in the future.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I did not know and do some research about Brooklyn Brewery, I've been living outside of New York now for almost 3 or 4 years now. But you guys are the official beer of the Museum of Food and Drink in New York.
Yes.
Obviously, can you tell us a little bit more about that? Obviously, right now it's not up because of COVID. But what does that mean, and what people can expect if they go to visit that museum?
Well, the next exhibit that's the Museum of Food and Drink, what we're looking to do is to build a full-scale museum of food and drink, almost certainly here in New York City. I mean, you think about it, the table, even now is, among the most important places in our whole life. That's where so many of the best moments in everyone's life happen, at the table. And there is no museum of food and drink anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
There's a museum of pasta and a museum of pizza and whatever else. But a real museum that, that just cross-culturally follows, this huge part of everyone's lives. And I think it's because it's so omnipresent that it almost seems like it's too big a thing to do. Right. But we don't think that it is too big a thing to do. Right now, we're doing it one exhibit at a time. the exhibit that was just about to open before COVID hit was called Setting the Nation's Table, African American. And it was about, or is about, the huge contribution of African Americans to all of American cuisine. I mean, for example, most people do not realize that haute cuisine, sort of serious French style cooking, came into the United States entirely and was promulgated entirely by African Americans.
Mm-hmm.
People think that there was some French dude who like came over in the 1700s and 1800s, like there was no French dude. People when they go, they will see and experience a truly fascinating history of how this really happened. And then we will continue on to other exhibits, over time. And so we're looking forward, obviously, to being able to bring our exhibit to the public. We have so many really cool artifacts, which include a couple of things that they asked me for, which was kind of them.
That's pretty cool. You can have some of your own stuff inside the museum, so that's pretty awesome. My father used to always joke that he had the first computer in the Smithsonian, so maybe that's a real thing that you can have. So that's really awesome. One of the other questions
I have the Schaefer Brewery's original fermentation dipsticks, which are about 12 feet long, and they're made of oak, and they were the size of Olympic swimming pools. Those fermenters. And if you look at Instagram, I think it was the last photo I put up is me with those dipsticks on the day that I got them, just before they knocked that building down, that brewery having been built in 1916. And then we used them at Brooklyn Brewery for many years. So there you go.
Very cool. Speaking of the old kind of historicalness here, there's a question from Alexander Gates here, who said the Oxford Companion to Beer is coming up on its 10th anniversary. Are there any plans to have an updated version?
It's funny you should ask that, because I'm kind of expecting the other shoe to drop any time now, and we're all get the email asking for that. We just had the Oxford book was just translated into Brazilian Portuguese, and so that I was supposed to be in Brazil like 2 weeks ago to help launch that. Obviously, that got set aside as well. But we're looking at other translations. I think that it is certainly a thing that will happen. It is, these things are always massive undertakings. And I think an update of these books, if you look at the Oxford Companion to Wine, in between the first, second, third, fourth editions, many, many updates and changes and new information and whatever else comes in. It's the nature of writing this kind of thing and doing this kind of work. So, I don't fool myself that if I do it, it would be a truly huge undertaking, almost as big as doing the original. Right. But, I think it'd be a thing that I have to do at least once before I maybe eventually handed it off to somebody else for other editions, or maybe not. Who knows?
Maybe when you turn 500 years old, you'll be able to do it.
Exactly. Got to have something to do when you're 500 years old.
Exactly. Another question we have from Rick Willis says, Garrett, one question I picked up on the interview with John Hall we did last Thursday is, what are your other passions besides brewing? Hobby interests that you want to share?
Well, if you look at my Instagram, one thing you'll notice is that most of my posts are actually not about beer. They're mostly about food and travel and sometimes cocktails. I will definitely say that, I'm a big fan of film and art and music. One of the many, many weird old things I did is I took the Ramones bowling once.
Oh, wow.
I went clubbing once with Michael Stipe from REM and Moby.
Oh, wow.
I put on REM in 1983 as the opening band for a band called the English Beat, who were huge at the time. And REM were like a new college radio band, at the time.
That's
and of
crazy.
course, there are some people there who are young enough that they're like, who are REM? So these things.
Look it up on Spotify. Look it up on Spotify. You're good.
These things keep moving. Look up It's the End of the World as We Know It, and that'll be your theme song for today.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I think that one of the cool things about being in the brewing industry is that a lot of people's passions and interests outside the process influence your own brewing, process itself. You being so big into food, and obviously adding that element in there gives perception of different tastes and profiles that you can have. And I think that it's really cool to have. You can be really all in on brewing, but if you don't have any other interests and talents and hobbies, you're gonna burn out pretty quickly and not be able to kind of push the boundaries, which you've been able to do pretty well within the ecosystem there. We have some
I would
more.
say, I think it's important if you're going to talk about beer, then you have to think about like how does beer actually live in people's lives, not just what talents does it have, but what do people really want to know about beer? It's like, okay, they might want to know something about a flavor profile, but what they really want to know is what does it taste like, who made it, why is it interesting?
Right.
What can I do with it? And like, what can I do with it is like, it can be a great refresher. It goes, if I can make your dinner a little bit better every day, just a little bit better, 20% better, every day, that means I've changed your life. That's not like a little thing because you eat dinner every single day.
Yes, absolutely.
And so if dinner gets a little bit better every day, that's like somebody playing you your first Coltrane record, and suddenly you're like, oh wow, I like jazz. It's like boom.
It's pretty crazy. Yeah, it's pretty crazy how that stuff falls together. I think that I remember watching your omelet video, and I love omelets, and I love all the stuff that you put out there. But when I heard you say Granny Smith apples, and I was like, I think something's wrong with Garrett here. That doesn't sound right in an omelet. But then as you're watching it and you see everything kind of come together, it makes sense. The acidity of the beer that you have paired with it, the acidity of the cheese, and also of the acidity of the apples, they all come together. So it's hard sometimes, I bet, for consumers out there to look at something at face value without looking at it too deeply and saying, oh wait. They do connect from that aspect there, and they do give it a good perception of what's happening there. So it's really cool to have that aspect.
Well, yeah, it's funny because people talk about Granny Smith. They're cooking apples, pie apples, et cetera. And there's a reason, because if you take a Fuji or a Golden Delicious or Red Delicious apple and make an omelet with it or make a pie out of it, like it's nasty. Like they're too flabby and sweet in their overall character to work when cooked, right. So there's a reason why, we don't generally eat Granny Smith apples straight unless we're having it with cheese or something to balance it out. It's a food thing, balance thing. So yeah, it's a great combo.
Yeah, well, speaking of food as well, being a New Yorker for so long, one of the places I love to go, and hopefully people on this listening in have been to, is Shake Shack. I know you guys partner with Shake Shack to do the Shake Meister beer. How did that whole thing start? Because I remember seeing it when I was living in New York, going into the Madison Square original location there and seeing that on the tap there. How did that conversation start?
Well, we've been good friends with the guys at Union Square Hospitality Group, which is where Shake Shack grew out of. Right. It was that bunch of people. Randy Garuti, who's a CEO, originally I first met him when he worked at Floyd Cardoz's restaurant. We just lost Floyd, unfortunately, to COVID. But a great Indian restaurant. He was working there, and a bunch of the other guys that I knew. And they started this Shake Shack out in Madison Square Park. And, people started waiting online for this burger. And I started waiting online for this burger, and it was great. So then one day Randy came to me and he said, we want you to make a beer for Shake Shack. And I think there was only the one location then. And we said, well, I don't know, you'd have to sell an awful lot of beer for that to be worthwhile. It's got to sell through. So you need to sell like a keg every day. And he said, like, we'll make that work. And they did. From this one little location, this one shack in the middle of the park, they were selling more than a keg a day when we did it. But what I did was we went and we tasted the burger. I kind of deconstructed the flavors of the burger, and I wanted a beer that made 2 + 2 = 5. Right. The burger's great and the beer is like really good, but when you got the two of them together, that was the thing.
I can attest 100% to that because I've had that many, many times, and it's delicious pairing.
And so it's the only thing that we've ever made that is meant specifically really to go with the food in one place like that. The only other one was at one time connected, and that was Blue Smoke, which was also, Danny Meyer, which we developed for their barbecue restaurant.
Yeah, if you've never been to Shake Shack, they are popping up all over the place nowadays. I highly recommend it. I know that I'm going to get flamed in the comments about the whole In-N-Out Burger versus Shake Shack conversation, but I'm on Team Shake Shack. I'm sorry.
First of all, In-N-Out Burger, as far as I know, doesn't have beer. Second of all,
they don't. Yeah.
Second of all, my first In-N-Out Burger was it was out in California, and it was in the back of Russian River Brewery's pickup truck, with Benicio Larcho driving. We got the double animals and whatever else, and we rolled out there, and we had them with Pliny in the back of the pickup truck, and they were great. But they ain't no Shake Shack.
100% agree with you on that point. I know.
I'll tell you right now, the meat is so much better. Another thing I've been loving these days is, when we don't have that, is pairing that up at lunchtime, with our non-alcoholic beer, which is called Special Effects, which also has some of that, caramelized, character. It's reminiscent to some extent of Meister. And, it's the first time really that at work, right near the brewery, there is a Shake Shack. And if I don't have a Meister, it's the middle of the day, I got to go back to work. I can sit there at my desk and have a Shack burger, and then I'll have some special effects with it. And then I'll go have the Meister later.
Nice.
Because sometimes you got to do some work.
Exactly. Well, Garrett, we really appreciate you hopping on this afternoon. Before we kind of let you jump here, I want to give you an opportunity to give any final plugs that you want to give where people can find your beer. I'm not sure what you guys are doing, whether you guys are doing curbside or anything of that nature, but anything you want to give the community out there in terms of where they can find your beer and a little bit about yourself.
Well, I just want everybody to, stay indoors, according to the guidelines, do what we got to do so we can all get past this. Always support your local brewery first. And if we're not your local brewery, I hope you'll think about us second. We got a lot of great beers out there. We're not doing curbside, but, through, great partners, not only supermarkets like, all the Whole Foods and Wegmans and everybody else in the world, but Fresh Direct is delivering, our beer in New York City. So, there's a lot of ways, to get your Brooklyn beer. We do continue to produce beer. The beer's going to be fresh. And we're moving it out there. We're trying to keep you as happy and healthy as possible while we all go through this. And we'll see you on the other side, back at our place in Brooklyn.
Awesome. Well, for those who are watching right now, I want to give you an update on what's happening coming on Untapped TV next Saturday. I'm sure Garrett knows this person really well. We're going to have Greg Koch over at Stone Brewing Company come on board. He's going to be talking to us a little bit about what Stone's doing and some of the new things that they're doing during this time of crisis. And then also we are going to be talking next Thursday for our virtual happy hour with M. Salters, which is the founder of Pints and Panels, an award-winning cartoonist and an advanced cicerone. And she'll be joined by my personal friend, Rob Brink, who is our product designer at Untapped, who also has done a lot of can art for Wilmington Brewing Company, which is the headquarter location for Untapped down in Wilmington, North Carolina. So we're super excited about that. Check out untapped.tv for all of these updates. And finally, one last plug for our sponsor today, Minibar. If you, like Gary just said, we want to support our breweries and our local restaurants out there. They're delivering a lot of product all over the place. So a great opportunity to do that while also getting some good deals off of it using the promo code Untapped, getting $10 off your first order at minibar.com. Download the app and you'll be good to go. So thank you very much, everyone, for watching the show.
Thank
Garrett.
you.
Thank you so much for having on this show. We really appreciate your expertise here, and I'm a little fanboy moment here because you're one of the original people that I have followed in the industry. So it's great to have you on here. And for everybody else, please stay safe out there. Make sure you check in your beers at Untapped at home. And thanks for watching. Cheers.
All right. Thanks, everybody.